Brenda, her face flushed with cheap wine, told the whole table how I still wore the same threadbare undershirt she bought me for our 10th anniversary. Laughter rippled through the reunion hall, her old high school friends cackling like hens. My cheeks burned. She then leaned over, whispering loud enough for everyone to hear, "You were always so predictable, weren't you, Dale?" Dale Shiosa Dale 62 drove his old sedan toward the Ford plant. Sinatra sang My Way softly from the radio, a tune he knew by heart. The sun was low, painting the sky in hues he barely registered. 42 years he had worked, punched the clock, done his part. Tonight was the party for it, a dinner the company threw for the retiring men. Brenda had been gone 2 years now. Cancer took her quickly, faster than anyone expected. He still caught himself reaching for her in the big bed or expecting her to call out from the kitchen. The house, built with his own two hands, felt too large, too quiet. The echo of empty rooms was a constant companion. He had been drafted right out of high school, just like his father. Vietnam. But Ford held his job for him, a promise kept. When he came back, the line was waiting. He worked his way up from the assembly floor to the pipe fitter's shop, a good steady job that paid the bills and then some, a consistent life. That was what he had always wanted, a foundation he could rely on. He remembered meeting Brenda at a friend's wedding. Some warm summer evening back in 1972. She was wearing a blue dress, laughing, her hair catching the light as she moved. She had just broken it off with some college boy, she told him later, a quiet admission over lukewarm punch. He saw her across the room and something shifted inside him, a recognition. They talked for hours, then danced, then he drove her home. They didn't even make it inside her front door. The car was parked under a sycamore tree, the windows fogging up with their breath and the urgent heat of that moment. He remembered the smell of fresh-cut grass and her perfume, the feeling of her hand on his chest. It felt like love right then, immediate and undeniable. 3 months later, she told him about the baby. There was no hesitation on his part. "Will you marry me?" he asked, already knowing the answer he wanted to hear. She said yes, her eyes wide and wet. They stood in front of a justice of the peace a week later. No big fuss, no white dress, just them and two witnesses. Over the next 16 years, their family grew. 4 boys, 2 girls, 2 miscarriages along the way, quiet sorrows they buried deep within their daily lives. Their existence became a demanding blur of school plays, scraped knees, soccer games, and church on Sundays. Vacations meant packing the station wagon until it groaned under the weight, driving to state parks or the Great Lakes, always with the children. There was no time for anything else, or so it seemed, not for long stretches. The intimacy, the reckless joy of that first night, it faded after the first child. It was just how things went, he figured, a common enough reality for people with mouths to feed and schedules to keep. They had other ways to show affection, he told himself, other ways to connect, quieter understandings. Brenda's grandparents, stout German farmers nearing 80, offered to sell them their 300-acre parcel of land for a song. They were getting old, moving south for the warmer winters. It was a deal too good to pass up, even with 6 children underfoot. Dale worked harder, took every overtime shift available. He moved up in the Ford plant, became a master pipe fitter, a trade that paid very well. They leased out the fields to a neighboring farmer, and between that steady income and his good wage, the farm was paid off in 25 years. A legacy, he thought, something tangible they built together. "We'll have time when the kids are gone," Brenda used to say, her voice soft, looking out at the cornfields. She found her contentment in the small things, in the children's successes, in the garden she kept. Their sacrifices were for the family, for the future they were building, one quiet day at a time. He believed that too. There were fights, of course, small ones about money or chores, the endless demands of a large family, and then there was the big one. He couldn't even remember what started it now, only the sudden, sharp silence that followed, heavier than any shouting. He'd packed a small bag, driven to his brother's house 3 towns over, stayed for a week. He came back to a quiet house, Brenda's face tired but unyielding. They never talked about it again. Not really. Not the heart of it. The first crack in their foundation, he recognized now, came with Brenda's high school reunions. She went every year, gathering with the same faces, laughing about things he didn't remember or understand. He stopped going after the third one, said he was tired, had work early, an excuse that became a habit. It became a quiet understanding, a space she had that he didn't share, a place where he felt increasingly disconnected. He never quite understood what she found there, but he knew he didn't want to find it with her. Just for a little while, Dale, Brenda had said, her voice softer than usual. She wanted him to come to her 15-year high school reunion. He usually made an excuse, pleading tiredness or an early shift. But that night, maybe he was feeling generous, or just tired of the same old routine. Fine, he grumbled, but don't expect me to stay long. He knew it was a weak moment, one he'd regret later. The high school gym smelled of cheap beer and stale perfume. The band played songs that blurred together, all sounding the same. Dale stood by the wall, nursing a plastic cup, watching Brenda. She was on the dance floor, laughing, moving with a lightness he hadn't seen in years. He watched her twirl with some man whose name he didn't catch, then another. A tightness began to settle in his chest, a familiar, unwelcome feeling. He felt like an outsider, a relic. Then he noticed Todd. Todd Miller, a name he remembered vaguely from Brenda's stories. Todd kept coming back to her, always drawing her into conversation, his hand resting on her arm a little too long, his head bent close as if sharing some secret. Dale watched the way Todd's eyes lingered on Brenda's face, the way she smiled back, a particular kind of smile she didn't usually offer him anymore. Suspicion, sharp and cold, began to prick at him. He drank more, glass after glass of weak punch cut with cheap whiskey. The music got louder, the faces more blurry. He wondered about all these men, her past, the lives she might have lived without him. Were these the moments she longed for when she went to these reunions? A life he wasn't a part of, had never been a part of. The whiskey made his thoughts darker, heavier. When it was time to leave, Brenda was still talking to Todd by the coat check. She laughed, a sound that grated on Dale's ears. Then she leaned in, hugged Todd, a long embrace that seemed to stretch out for an eternity. Too long, he thought, far too long for a casual goodbye between old classmates. Todd squeezed her waist before he let go. Dale felt his jaw tighten, his hands clenching at his sides. The drive home was silent, except for the hum of the engine. Brenda was humming softly, lost in some pleasant memory, oblivious to the simmering resentment beside her. He kept his eyes on the road, the yellow lines blurring under the headlights. The anger felt like a hot stone in his gut, growing heavier with each mile. He pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and walked into the dark house, the silence following him like a shadow. He woke up with a pounding headache the next morning, the lingering taste of stale whiskey in his mouth. The sun was too bright through the window. He could hear the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The kids were on a church field trip, which meant Brenda wouldn't be cooking breakfast. He dragged himself out of bed, the events of the night before still churning in his mind, unclear but unsettling. That afternoon, a miracle. Work finished early. The foreman told them the order was filled. They could pack it in. Dale checked out, his lunch pail still full, the prospect of a quiet afternoon, maybe an early dinner, sounding like salvation. He drove home, the hangover still a dull ache, but the fresh air helped. He looked forward to an early night, maybe just sit in the living room and watch some television. As he pulled into the driveway, he saw it. A dark blue rental car, a compact model he didn't recognize, parked half on the grass, half on the gravel. His stomach dropped. A knot tightened in his chest. Brenda didn't have any friends with a car like that. He killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening. He walked to the front door, the key already in his hand. The knot tightened further. He turned the lock, pushed the heavy oak door inward. The house was quiet, too quiet. The soft scent of her perfume mixed with something else, unfamiliar, hung in the air. He stepped into the living room, and that's when he saw them. Brenda and Todd. They were standing near the fireplace, bodies pressed close, their lips still tangled together. The kiss broke the moment he entered, Brenda's head snapping up, her eyes wide with shock. Todd pulled back, his face a mask of sudden horror. Todd's hands. Dale saw them clearly. One on Brenda's waist, the other cupping the curve of her backside. A cold wave washed over him, a deep, sickening lurch in his gut. What the hell is going on? His voice ripped through the quiet house, raw and guttural. Brenda pushed Todd away, a small, desperate sound escaping her lips. Todd held up his hands, a pathetic gesture of surrender. Nothing, Dale, nothing happened. I was just leaving, just saying goodbye. His voice was thin, reedy, utterly unconvincing. Dale moved then, a sudden, explosive motion. He shoved Todd hard in the chest, sending him stumbling back against the wall. Todd gasped, regained his balance. Dale's eyes, narrowed and cold, fixed on Brenda. He's probably Billy's father, he spat, the words tearing from his throat, devastating and cruel. The punch landed clean, a sickening thud against Todd's jaw. Todd stumbled, hitting the wall again, a thin trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. Dale didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out, the front door slamming shut behind him. Brenda's scream, high-pitched and raw, echoed in the silent house, chasing him down the driveway. He got into his truck, the engine roaring to life with an angry cough. He put it in reverse, spun gravel, and sped down the long farm lane. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. The words, "He's probably Billy's father," still echoed in his own ears, sharp and cruel. He instantly regretted them. Billy, his youngest son, bright-eyed and innocent. That was a low blow, even for him, even in this anger. He drove aimlessly past fields of young corn, past old farmhouses where lights were just coming on. The thought flickered, go back and really beat the hell out of Todd. But by the time he circled back to the farm lane, Todd's rental car was gone. Just as well, he thought, a grim satisfaction replacing some of the immediate rage. He didn't need a fight, he needed something else. He drove into town, the small cluster of shops and houses, looking lonely under the fading light. He spotted a cheap motel on the edge of town, its neon sign flickering a dim red. Next to it, a bar, a single yellow light casting a weak glow from its windows. He pulled into the motel parking lot, cut the engine, and walked into the office. "A room for the night," he told the bored-looking clerk. "Just one." Inside the bar, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke. He found a stool at the far end of the bar, ordered a whiskey and a beer. The jukebox played Frank Sinatra. That's life. He listened to the words, "I've been a puppet, a pauper, a poet, a poet, a pawn, and a king." A bitter smile touched his lips. It felt like defiance, like understanding. If Brenda could, he thought, then so could he. A cold, hard resolve settled in him. It wasn't about love, not anymore. It was about evening the score. An eye for an eye, a betrayal for a betrayal. He felt a sudden, desperate urge to inflict the same pain, the same confusion that Brenda had just inflicted on him. A woman was sitting 2 stools down, nursing a glass of wine. She had auburn hair, pulled back into a ponytail, and her eyes, though tired, held a spark he recognized. She looked up, caught his gaze. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice low. "Something like that," Dale replied, taking a long drink of whiskey. "My husband's probably off with his secretary again," she offered, a wry twist to her lips. "Some men just don't know when they have got it good." Her name was Sharon. She was married like him and just as betrayed. They talked for hours, the whiskey and beer flowing. They didn't talk about their specific betrayals, not really. Just the generalized ache of it, the cold shock of realizing your life wasn't what you thought it was. They got drunk, slowly, steadily, a shared despair forming a strange kind of bond between them. Her husband, she said, was a real estate agent, always on business trips. Dale just nodded, letting her words wash over him, understanding without needing to explain. When the bartender called last call, Sharon looked at him, her eyes clouded with drink, but steady. "Your room's right there, isn't it?" she asked, nodding towards the motel. He simply nodded back. They walked the short distance, the night air cool on their faces. Inside the motel room, the lights were dim. There was no tenderness, no romance. It was an act of vengeance, a bitter transaction. Dale moved with a detached urgency, driven by the anger still simmering beneath his skin. It wasn't about her, he knew that. It was about Brenda, about the hollow ache she had left in him. He wanted to feel something, anything, besides the cold shock of betrayal. The morning light, thin and gray, filtered through the motel curtains. A cooler head had prevailed. The anger was still there, a dull throb, but the immediate impulse for revenge had passed, replaced by a weary resignation. He called work, his voice raspy. Not coming in today. Something came up. No questions asked. Sharon got up, moved silently around the small room. She showered, the water running for a long time. When she emerged dressed and composed, she looked at him, a fleeting expression in her eyes he couldn't quite decipher. I should go, she said. He watched her leave, the door clicking shut behind her. He sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap mattress sagging under his weight. What came next? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. He had nowhere to go, nothing planned. He eventually drove home, timing it carefully. The kids would be at school, Brenda at work. The house was empty. He walked through the rooms, the silence deafening. In the bedroom, he pulled out 2 suitcases from the closet. He packed them quickly, methodically, clothes, a few books, his shaver. He didn't hesitate. He knew he couldn't stay. Back at the motel, he set the suitcases inside the door. He opened a beer, the cold metal can sweating in his hand. He sat on the bed again, staring at the television, but not seeing it. He drank slowly, contemplating his next move, the long, empty road ahead. Dale stayed at the motel for 3 days, then 4. He let the phone ring, watching Brenda's name flash on the screen, a relentless beacon of his unresolved anger. He ignored the messages piling up, voicemails from his kids asking where he was, their young voices tinged with worry. Brenda's calls, however, he couldn't entirely ignore. Her voice, hoarse and tearful, pleaded with him. She denied everything, claimed nothing happened, just a friendly goodbye. Please, Dale, come home, she begged. The kids miss you. I miss you. We need you. He heard the echo of their children's confusion in the background sometimes, a distant murmur of their lives continuing without him. It twisted a knife in his gut. Then the bank account was frozen. Brenda's doing, he knew. His cash reserves, carefully built over years, dwindled rapidly. The motel room felt less like a refuge and more like a cage. He had to think. He called Roy, his old friend from Ford. Roy answered on the second ring, his voice gruff but familiar. Where the hell are you, Dale? Brenda's calling everyone. Dale told him a version of events, editing out the punch, editing out Sharon, focusing on the betrayal he felt. Roy listened, quiet for a long time. Look, Dale, Roy said finally, his voice soft. You got to go home. You got to talk to her. Let it fester, and it'll just eat you alive. You got 6 kids, man. They need you there. Roy's words were reasonable, practical. They hit home, a little. Dale sat with Roy's advice, the cold truth of it. He replayed the scene in his head over and over. The whiskey he'd drunk that day, the anger that had clouded his judgment. Had he really seen what he thought he'd seen? The image of Todd's hands on Brenda's backside, her lips pressed against his, blurred at the edges, less certain now than it had been in the first surge of fury. Maybe it wasn't as bad as he made it out to be, or maybe he just wanted to believe that. Roy called back a few days later. Brenda called me, he said. She's got Clyde helping out with the chores, but it's not the same. She's running herself ragged with the kids too, trying to get them to school and back, to all their activities. Clyde was their hired farmhand, a good kid, but not Dale. Not the father, not the husband. It confirmed what Dale suspected. Brenda was pulling everyone into their mess. The thought of his children, confused and struggling, weighed heavily on him. He saw their faces, heard their questions. Guilt, a cold, heavy hand, pressed down on him. He became a regular at the motel bar, a silent observer among the other lonely souls. He nursed his drinks, watched the television, listened to the murmur of conversations. He was slowly drinking away his savings, one whiskey at a time, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Then Sharon appeared again, sliding onto the stool 2 seats down. Her hair was down this time, framing a tired face. Rough day, she said, ordering a glass of wine. She looked at him, a familiar seeking in her eyes. My husband's got a conference in Chicago, an extra long one. He knew what she meant. He saw the invitation, the shared misery, the fleeting comfort she offered. But the initial surge of anger that had fueled his revenge had long since dissipated, leaving only a hollow ache. "I'm okay, Sharon," he said, his voice softer than he intended, "just having a quiet drink." He politely declined her unspoken advances. He just didn't have it in him. Not anymore. Later that night, his phone rang. He hesitated, but then picked it up. It wasn't Brenda. It was Billy, his youngest. "Dad?" Billy's voice was small, hesitant. "Mom says you're working, but I called your work, and they said you weren't there. When are you coming home?" The questions, simple and direct, pierced through him. He couldn't bring himself to lie to Billy, but he couldn't tell him the truth either. He just sat there, listening to his son's worried voice, his heart breaking, piece by piece. "Soon, Billy," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Soon." He packed his bags again the next morning, paid his bill, and checked out of the motel. The drive home was a slow one, the old sedan humming along the highway. He was going home, yes, but he still didn't know what he would say or what he would do once he got there. He was still uncertain of his stance, only that he couldn't stay away from his children any longer. Dale pulled into the driveway, the familiar gravel crunching under his tires. Brenda's old sedan was parked next to the garage. The dark blue rental car was gone. He took a deep breath, the stale air in his lungs doing little to calm his nerves. The front door was unlocked, just as it usually was. He pushed it open, stepping into the quiet house. Brenda was in the kitchen washing dishes, her back to him. Her shoulders were hunched, and her movements were slow, deliberate. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She tried to force a smile. "Dale," she said, her voice thin, "you're home. How was your day?" She asked it like any other day, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't been gone for a week. He didn't answer her question. He just watched her, the silence stretching between them. She wrung her hands, then turned back to the sink. "Todd was just leaving," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "Nothing happened, Dale. Just a moment of weakness. An old friend saying goodbye." The same story, the same denial. "I saw his hands, Brenda," Dale said, his voice flat, emotionless. "I saw where they were." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And I know about the bank account. You froze it." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Brenda turned back to him, her eyes welling up. "It was just a kiss, Dale, I swear," she pleaded. "He was leaving and I don't know what came over me." Tears streamed down her face. "But nothing else, and about Billy. How could you say that? How could you even think that?" The accusation about Billy, his youngest son, still stung her, more than anything else. He looked at her, at the tears, at the genuine pain in her eyes. But another kind of anger, colder, harder, stirred within him. If she could inflict this wound, he could inflict one too. "Good," he said, his voice laced with venom. "Because I had my own moment of weakness, Brenda. With a woman from the bar, Sharon." He watched her face, searching for the crack, the same shock he had felt. It came. Brenda froze, the color draining from her face, her mouth opened, then closed. The tears stopped, replaced by a stunned, hollow silence. Her own pain, her own guilt, seemed to shrivel, eclipsed by his raw, brutal admission. She just stared at him, speechless. Just then, the familiar rumble of the school bus filled the quiet air. The back door slammed, and a moment later, the front door burst open. Their children, a whirlwind of backpacks and chatter, streamed into the house. "Dad!" Billy shouted, running straight to him, wrapping his small arms around Dale's legs. Dale forced a smile, patted Billy's head. Brenda, still pale, managed to conjure a strained grin. They played the part, pretending for the children, shielding them from the raw, open wound in the room. Dinner was a quiet affair, a heavy silence broken only by the children's innocent chatter about their day. Dale and Brenda exchanged no words, no glances. The food on his plate tasted like ash. "Dad," Billy piped up halfway through his mashed potatoes, "why were you gone so long? Mom said you were working extra." The innocent question hung in the air, bringing the tension to a sharp, unbearable point. Dale looked at Brenda. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Just a lot of work, son," Dale mumbled, forcing a lightness he didn't feel. After dinner, Brenda took the children upstairs for their bedtime routine, her voice subdued as she wished them good night. Dale stayed downstairs, alone with the echoing silence. He grabbed a pillow and a blanket from the linen closet, making up the couch in the living room. It was an unspoken agreement, a clear line drawn. The marital bed was off limits. Both Dale and Brenda lay awake that night, in separate rooms, separated by a thin wall of silence and betrayal. Dale stared at the dark ceiling, the shadows playing tricks in the corners of the room. He could feel Brenda's presence upstairs, her pain, her anger, a mirror of his own. The wreckage of their marriage, he realized, was complete. He got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark fields of their farm. The land they had bought, worked, paid off. Their life, all of it. It felt heavier than ever, a crushing weight on his shoulders. This was a costly choice, and he understood then that the repercussions would last a lifetime. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The breakfast table was a landscape of unspoken tension. The children chattered, oblivious, but their laughter felt thin, easily broken. Dale watched Brenda as she poured milk, her movements stiff. Her eyes, still swollen from crying, avoided his. He could feel the kids glancing between them, sensing something wrong, a shift in the air they couldn't name. After the school bus pulled away, Brenda turned to him, her voice low and steady. "We need to talk," she said. He simply nodded. There was no point in delaying it. They sat at the kitchen table, the empty chairs around them, a stark reminder of their fractured family. Dale leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "Was Todd Miller the one?" he asked, the question he had carried for 20 years. "The one you broke up with, before me?" Brenda's gaze dropped to her hands, clasped tight on the tabletop. "Yes," she whispered, the single word confirmation of a long-held suspicion. Brenda looked up, her eyes pleading. "Dale, it's been so lonely," she began, her voice cracking. "You're always at work or watching TV. We never talk anymore, and the intimacy, it just stopped, Dale. I felt like I was just the mother, like you took me for granted." The words tumbled out, a dam breaking. Accusations flew then, a volley of bitter words, each blaming the other for the slow, creeping distance that had grown between them over the years. He accused her of neglect, of putting the children first to the exclusion of him. She accused him of emotional withdrawal, of leaving her alone in the marriage. "And what about you?" Brenda spat, her voice rising. "You cheated too. You think that makes it even? That makes it right?" He had no defense. His own confession, meant as a weapon, had become a boomerang, striking him just as hard. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with their mutual failings. Brenda stood up, pushing her chair back with a scrape that echoed in the quiet room. "I don't think we can do this anymore, Dale," she said, her voice trembling. This isn't a marriage. Maybe we should just get divorced." The word hung in the air, cold and final. Dale felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Divorce. The end of everything. "What about the frame?" he asked. The practical matter cutting through the emotional chaos, the farm, their dream, their legacy. Now it was just a piece of property, something to be divided. Who gets what? The question, once unthinkable, was now real. Later that week, Dale secretly consulted a lawyer in town. The man, a tired-looking older fellow with a stack of papers on his desk, laid out the harsh realities. Splitting assets, the house, the land, the bank accounts, custody of the children. It was a complicated, messy business, expensive and emotionally draining. The picture he painted was bleak. Brenda, meanwhile, confided in her sister, Elaine. Dale overheard snippets of their phone calls, Brenda's muffled sobs, Elaine's soothing voice. Brenda broke down, telling Elaine about Todd, about Dale's discovery, and about his brutal retaliation. The shame and pain in her voice were palpable, even from a distance. Roy confronted Dale during a quiet moment at work. "Brenda's a mess, Dale," he said, his voice unusually serious. "She's talking to everyone. Elaine says you really hurt her. Look, I know you're mad, but you got to try and fix this, man. For the kids, if not for you two." Roy, always the voice of reason, was now a witness to their unraveling. The older children, sensing the palpable tension that permeated the house, started asking difficult questions. "Why are you sleeping on the couch, Dad?" Are you and Mom mad at each other? Dale and Brenda offered vague, unconvincing answers, but the kids weren't stupid. They knew. One afternoon, Billy came running to Dale, clutching a piece of paper. It was a drawing, a crude, brightly colored picture of their family. Brenda, the girls, the boys. But Dale wasn't in it. His absence was stark, a silent indictment, a visual representation of the growing divide. It tore at something deep inside him. They tried a temporary arrangement. Dale would stay at the motel for a few days, then return to the farm while Brenda went to stay with her sister. They alternated, a careful dance of shared custody, attempting to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the children. When Dale was at the farm alone, without Brenda, the house felt even larger, emptier than before. The silence pressed in on him. He walked through the rooms, the echoes of their life together, the memories, a constant reminder of what they were losing. The solitude was deeply unsettling, a profound loneliness settling into his bones. He missed her, not just her presence, but the familiar rhythm of their life, even if it had been strained. The older children, the ones already in college or starting their own careers, demanded a family meeting. They sat in the living room, their faces grim, expectant. "What the hell is going on, Mom, Dad?" their eldest son Michael asked, his voice raw with frustration. Brenda, her voice trembling, finally admitted to the kiss with Todd. She spoke of her loneliness, her feeling of being taken for granted, the years of unmet needs. Tears streamed down her face as she laid bare her raw, fractured truth. "I felt invisible," she whispered. Then it was Dale's turn. He looked at his children, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger. He confessed his own infidelity, the night with Sharon. The words felt flat, empty, even as they delivered a fresh shockwave through the room. He saw the looks on his children's faces, the dawning realization that their parents were not who they thought they were, that their entire childhood might have been built on a lie. "How could you?" their daughter Sarah cried, her voice choked with tears. "How could you both do this?" The children were furious, hurt, and deeply confused. The safe world they had known was crumbling around them. Suddenly, Billy, who had been quietly playing with a toy truck in the corner, looked up, his small face contorted with confusion. He must have picked up snippets of the conversation, keywords that pierced his young mind. "Dad," he asked, his voice trembling, are you not my real dad? Because of the fight?" The question hit Dale like a physical blow. His stomach lurched. He dropped to his knees, taking Billy's small hands in his. "Billy," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am your real dad. Of course I am." He looked at Brenda, a silent plea in his eyes. He had to confirm it. "I even took a day test years ago, just to be sure. You're my son, my boy." He hadn't meant to reveal that, not now, not ever. The words slipped out, desperate and true. Brenda gasped, her eyes blazing with a fresh fury. "You did what?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "You doubted me that much? You went behind my back and got a secret day test for our son?" The betrayal for her was now twice over, deeper, more insidious. The farm, once their shared dream, now became the central battleground. Neither was willing to give it up. It represented security, their children's inheritance, a lifetime of work. "It's my family's land," Brenda argued. "My grandparents sold it to us." Dale countered, "I paid for it, Brenda, with 40 years at Ford." The discussions became heated, circular, ending only when someone stormed out. The legal fees began to mount, each bill a stark reminder of their unraveling. Their already divided finances were strained to the breaking point. The lawyers, cold and efficient, only intensified the bitterness. One of the younger children's birthdays arrived, a somber affair. Dale and Brenda forced themselves to be civil, to sit at the same table, but their parents barely spoke. The cake, too sweet, went largely uneaten. The celebration felt hollow, a performance for the innocent. Dale felt increasingly isolated. His friends, like Roy, tried to stay neutral, offering platitudes, but he felt them pulling away, uncomfortable with the mess. He was losing them too. He'd made his bed, he knew, but lying in it felt colder than he ever imagined. Brenda, on the other hand, seemed to find more support. Her sister Elaine was a constant presence, offering comfort and advice. Her old high school friends rallied around her, their quiet judgment of Dale palpable in the grocery store aisles or at church. Their church pastor, a kind, earnest man, tried to intervene, offering counseling. "You built a life together," he urged them. "It's not too late to repair it." But they refused to go together. Too much bitterness, too much unspoken anger. Whispers spread through their small, Midwestern town like wildfire. The story, distorted and embellished, was everywhere. Dale felt the stares at the bus station, the knowing glances at the diner. The public shame was an added weight pressing down on him. Clyde, their farmhand, remained steadfastly loyal to Brenda. He continued to help her with the chores, offering her quiet support, his presence on the farm a constant reminder of Dale's absence, further alienating him. The farm, once a source of pride, now felt like a place he was slowly being edged out of. Brenda started seeing a counselor, a quiet woman in the next town over. Dale heard about it through the kids. She was trying, he realized, to sort through the wreckage, to understand her own feelings of betrayal and the part she played in the unraveling. Roy, ever persistent, kept after Dale. "Just go, Dale. Talk to someone. It ain't going to fix itself." Finally, Dale relented. He found a male counselor, an older gentleman with kind eyes who listened more than he spoke. It was a reluctant step, but a necessary one. Both counselors independently challenged them, not to blame each other, but to look at their shared history, the slow drift, the individual contributions to the marital decline. Dale talked about the years of unspoken grievances, Brenda about her loneliness and feeling invisible. It was difficult, painful work, dredging up decades of buried emotions. One evening when Billy was upstairs, Dale went into his room. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Billy," he started, his voice soft, "I'm sorry for what I said about you. Not being my real son. That was wrong. You are my son. I love you, boy." Billy, eyes wide, nodded slowly, then wrapped his arms around Dale's neck. The hug, tight and earnest, was a small step towards healing. Brenda, seeing Dale's quiet efforts, the changes in his demeanor, began to soften. During one of their strained conversations, she looked at him, her eyes weary. "I forgive you," she said, her voice barely audible. "For the DNA test. It hurt, Dale, but I understand now, maybe." It wasn't a full absolution, but it was a start. For the sake of the younger children, they agreed to a truce. They wouldn't reconcile, not yet, but they would attempt to co-parent more amicably. The bitter arguments ceased, replaced by stiff, formal discussions about schedules and school. Dale established a new routine. He stayed in the small motel room for a few more weeks, then rented a small apartment in town. He found comfort at the quiet solitude, the predictable rhythm of his new, smaller life. But he still missed the farm, the open fields, the scent of the earth after a rain. It was a part of him, forever etched in his memory. Brenda, meanwhile, dedicated herself to the farm and the children. She learned to manage the fields with Clyde's help, took on more responsibilities. She found a new strength in her independence, a quiet resolve that had been hidden beneath years of marriage. Their oldest daughter, Sarah, who had watched their painful dance with a maturity beyond her years, made a suggestion. "You two are just circling the same drain," she told them one day. "Why don't you get a mediator? Just for the farm. Someone neutral." It was a difficult decision, but they eventually agreed. After several tense sessions, they settled on a compromise. They would sell a portion of the land, enough to split the proceeds. Brenda would keep the original house in a smaller, manageable acreage. Dale would take his share of the money. It was a painful division of their shared history, but it brought a measure of peace. Dale found a comfortable, smaller house in town, a modest place with a small yard. It was closer to amenities, to the grocery store, to the library, but it still felt empty, a void where the bustling life of the farm used to be. Weeks later, Todd contacted Brenda. He sent a letter, filled with apologies, trying to explain his actions, his loneliness, his regret. Brenda read it, then threw it in the trash. She had closed that door. There was no going back. Dale saw Sharon one day at the grocery store. She was pushing a cart, her hair pulled back, looking tired. They made eye contact, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared, regretted night that neither of them spoke of. He simply nodded, and she nodded back. Then they moved on. Two strangers again. Years passed. The first grandchild was born, a tiny, squalling bundle of joy that brought a moment of fragile, shared happiness between Dale and Brenda. They sat in the waiting room, grandparents now, their eyes meeting over the small, perfect face of their son's baby. They managed to share holidays for the children and the growing number of grandchildren. It was a strained but civil peace, a new kind of family, fractured but still connected by blood and history. The farm, smaller now, still stood, a testament to what once was and what remained. Years passed, blurring into a new rhythm. The initial sharpness of the pain, the raw fury had dulled, replaced by a quiet ache. The scars of the affair, however, remained, indelible marks on their lives. Dale often sat on the small porch of his new house in town, watching the Midwestern sunset paint the sky. He reflected on the choices made, the words exchanged, the path taken. He saw the turning points, the moments where things could have gone differently, but didn't. Brenda, he heard, had thrived on the smaller farm. She had become a pillar in the community, her strength undeniable. She managed the land, raised the younger children, and welcomed grandchildren with a quiet dignity he admired from afar. The children, though scarred by the divorce, had found their own ways to cope. They built their own families, forged their own paths. Their love for him and for Brenda had endured, albeit in a different, more complicated form. Billy, especially, remained close, a constant source of quiet joy. Dale and Brenda occasionally crossed paths in town, at the grocery store, or the post office. They exchanged polite, distant greetings, a nod, a brief hello. There were moments, fleeting glances, shared across an aisle, where an unspoken apology hung in the air between them, understood, but never voiced. Too much had happened, too much had been said, for simple words to fix. He fully comprehended now the price to pay for his actions and for Brenda's. The permanent fracturing of their once whole family. The children, divided between two homes, two lives. It was a cost that couldn't be quantified, a wound that never fully closed. He came to understand that neither of them was entirely blameless, that their marriage had eroded over time, a slow decay that had finally crumbled under the weight of one desperate moment. Dale found a quiet acceptance, a resignation to the life he now led, shaped by past choices. He found peace in his solitude, in his continued connection with his children, and in the simple routines of his days. He walked the neighborhood, read his books, and watched the seasons change. Brenda, too, had found her own hard-won contentment, though he knew it was tinged with the sadness of what might have been. The farm, smaller now, still stood, passed down through their children, a silent testament to their life together and apart, a witness to their triumphs and failures. The story ended not with a dramatic resolution, but with the quiet, ongoing reality of life lived after significant loss. Deoli often thought about the complex nature of morality, how easy it was to fall, and how incredibly hard it was to pick yourself back up, to rebuild a life from the rubble. He heard Frank Sinatra again sometimes, a song drifting from a distant radio. "That's life," he'd sing, and the words resonated with a deeper, more profound meaning than they ever had before.